Our next session turns from mythology to history and to stories that have remained hidden for far too long. History often remembers great battles and famous leaders, but sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that history nearly forgot. This session explores the untold stories of prisoners of war during the Second World War. Gautam Hazarika, whose book The Forgotten Indian Prisoners of World War II sheds light on these neglected histories, and he has spoken about the subject of war prisoners at museums, conferences, and literary festivals across the world. Joining him are Devika Pande, a third-generation hotelier from Nainital, and Subhashini Ali, a veteran political leader and long-time advocate for workers' and women's rights. She has been influential as the leader of All India Democratic Women's Association. Moderating this conversation is Nikhil Rudra, an academic administrator and a lifelong student of history. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Congratulations to Amitabh Singh Baghel. This is the second edition, and yes, on day one, it's been fantastic so long, bro. Well done, bro. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about World War II, normally we discuss about the Americans, the British, Germans, Japanese, the French. Very seldom there's a discussion about Indian soldiers who participated in World War II. And this is the book that the Forgotten Indian Prisoners of World War II by Gautam Hazarika. He is mentioned in great detail about the several thousand Indian soldiers who fought in World War II. Gautam, a banker. What was the inspiration for a banker to write a book on soldiers who participated in this war?
The inspiration was the soldiers, actually. So yes, I was a very happy banker till a few years back. And then I stumbled upon the story of these soldiers. I didn't know about them. And as I discovered, many people in India also didn't know about them. And I thought that the story of these soldiers was really something that, is worth telling. And I was inspired by them, and the publishers agreed with me. So that's why we're here. And yeah, the stories are incredible. That's why they're here.
That's wonderful. I want to ask Subhashini ji, I want to ask you about the pioneering all-female combat unit of the INA, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment.
How long do you want my answer to be?
All up to you.
You see, first of all, I'd like to just say a little bit more about the book, because it's Gautam's book and maybe he's modest about it. It's a really, I think it's a path-breaking book in many ways, because this is about people that we Indians have forgotten. This is the tragedy. These are Indians from all parts of India who were part of the British Indian Army, who fought for the British Empire and actually, I think, kept it afloat for maybe longer than it would have been afloat had they not been fighting for the empire. And they fought all over the world. They were prisoners of war not only in Singapore, but they were prisoners of war in Germany. They were prisoners of war in many other parts of the world. And they really went through hell because nobody was really bothered about them. I mean, they were not white, so they were not British. They were not, the surrendered British POWs. They were second-class citizens, Indian soldiers who were prisoners of war. Now, in that situation, another thing that many, many people don't remember, and it's not part of our history books to the extent that it should be, is that one section of these prisoners of war did something which was really remarkable and historical, and that is that when they surrendered in Singapore to the Japanese, and the British officers, it's a very strange thing, said, well, now our relationship is over. We are handing you over to the Japanese. Ab aap jano aur wo jane, humse ab koi matlab nahi hai. It was quite shocking. And so there were these about 40,000 Indian prisoners of war of the Japanese just in Singapore. Now the Japanese, I think they were very intelligent people. So what they proposed to these soldiers was कि अगर आप लोग अपने देश की आज़ादी के लिए लड़ना चाहते हो, if you want to fight for the freedom of India, we are ready to help you. We are ready to form an army of for Indian independence right here in Singapore. We'll help you to the best of our ability and so on and so forth. And we're giving you the option to opt for this army or to remain prisoners of war. So out of that 40,000, a whole lot opted to be prisoners of war. Anyway, that's there in the book, and maybe other questions will be asked about that. I've been asked about something else. My mother obviously was not one of those who surrendered because she was not in the British Indian Army. She was a rather unique woman who was one of the first women doctors. She passed out from medical college in Chennai. She came from a very family of freedom fighters. And she was a woman who was completely fearless and very committed to whatever she believed in. She would go to any lengths for what she believed. And she had run away from home, India, Madras, everything else. She has given very good reasons for it, which aren't actually the full reason. She says she left India after she became a doctor because the British said that all doctors now have to work for the British, either in our hospitals or wherever. And she said, oh, I didn't want to work for them. But that's not the only reason. She was also having an extramarital love affair with somebody who had also gone to Singapore. And so she followed him to Singapore. She had relatives there. And she set up her practice. Because she was, apart from a lady who was, romantic, she was deeply, deeply committed to the service of the poorest people. So she had this huge practice in Singapore of people belonging to the Indian diaspora. They were poor people. Their families were in the plantations, their families were in petty shopkeepers, their families were small, employees of the government, etc., mostly from South India, mostly from Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And so she treated these people, and she had a huge practice, she was very popular and all that. Now what happened was that when the Japanese made this offer to the prisoners of war who had surrendered, she was very excited, and she got quite involved in a way that was very interesting. My father was one of the first to join the INA, Colonel Sehgal, and he had a friend who was from Madras who had been my mother's classmate in medical college. So they needed medical supplies for their own wounded. So this friend of my father said, well, I have a classmate who's a doctor here, and I know that everybody in Singapore will be able to lead us to the Indian woman doctor here. And he was right. By that time, they had started working when the Japanese occupied. They were working in the government hospital there, my mother and her friend. So they arrived there, and my mother was absolutely thrilled. Now I must tell you that my mother was a very noble person, but she also had a habit of theft, serious habit of stealing. She used to steal from her mother's house all the time to take stuff to the hospital for the patients there. And this gave her a chance to go back to her, actually maybe a preferred profession of banditry. So she started stealing medicine and medical supplies from the government hospital to give for the prisoners of war who were wounded and so on. So my father and his friend and others were regular visitors. And she'd keep saying, you must form this army and you must get others to do it. All that. Anyway, now you have to read the book. That army went through certain problems. General Mohan Singh was the head of it. Then that didn't work out, etc., etc. Meanwhile, Subhash Chandra Bose was in Germany. He had escaped heroically from house arrest in Calcutta. And, I don't know how. Coming to Nainital is quite a trip. But he escaped from Calcutta and ended up in Germany via Peshawar and Soviet Union and all of that. And he arrived in Germany and he wanted Hitler's help with the Indian prisoners of war there to start an army there to fight the British in the West. Now, all that sounds very, very horrible now because, they lost the war and they were the bad guys, and the Brits and the Americans won the war, they're the good guys. But seeing what's happening in the world today, I don't think anybody who fights a war is a good guy, quite frankly. They're all bad guys. So anyway, he wanted to be with one of the bad guys to fight against another bad guy. That was his logic. Hitler didn't give him the time of day. He was a very racist fellow, so he didn't really care about Indian independence. He was quite happy with Indians being slaves of the British. And Netaji realized that soon enough. Anyway, then there was this opportunity that if he could get to Singapore, then he could take over the leadership of the Indian National Army that had been set up there. So anyway, there's a lot of talk and all that. And so he gets into this submarine at the height of the war at sea. I mean, he could have been torpedoed and sunk any time. But he makes this whole journey, it's very interesting, to Tokyo and then finally ends up in Singapore. And my mother in Singapore was also very much in touch with the people who were like Congress people in Singapore. I mean, people of Indian origin who were helping the freedom movement. So because of her mother and her family, she knew all of them. So she was part of the 5 or 6 people, civilians, who went to receive Netaji at the airstrip. And she went there and he was happy because he knew her mother. She was happy to meet her and she was thrilled and all the rest of it. And anyway, that was their meeting. Now what happens after this is very interesting. You know, most leaders who are men, they all talk about women's equality and women's liberation, but I don't think they're very serious about it. That's my real gripe with most of them. I was not a great Netaji fan growing up. I became a communist and all that, so on and so forth. But I do think that out of all our leaders in India, he was the one who I think was most committed to women's equality and women's liberation. I really believe that. Anyway, you'll be interested to know that he had decided that there would be a women's regiment even when he was on that submarine. Because he dictated a speech that he would make on the day that the regiment was fully trained. मतलब अभी regiment बनी नहीं है, अभी इसकी शुरुआत भी नहीं हुई है, but he's already written the speech and got it prepared, which shows that he was committed to it. So then he arrives here, and of course he's surrounded by male chauvinists, Indian and Japanese, who say, women, are you mad? There are no women here. There are never any women there except, they're just supposed to cook and produce children. They're not supposed to do anything else. So there are no women here. Where are we going to find women to be in the regiment? He said, you don't know anything about Indian women. You don't know anything about women. But anyway, you just get me one woman who's educated and, this thing, and you see what happens. They said, no, there's nobody like that. Then he said, what about that woman doctor who came to the airstrip? They said, yeah, she's got potential. So they sent for her that very night. That was, I think, the 2nd or 3rd day that he arrived in Singapore. And my mother arrived to meet him, and he said, I want to start this regiment. She said, when? So he said, well, whenever you're ready. She said, tomorrow. And, so boyfriend was forgotten, the medical career was forgotten, patients were forgotten, and the next morning, she arrived at the camp, and they set up this office, and they started recruiting. Now, you should read about it, but what I do want to tell you is that who are the women who joined? When we think about warlike women in India, we think of Haryanvis or, the wrestlers and, Punjabis and all that. But these were all South Indian women. That was all that there was. Malayalis and Tamil women. And poor women from very poor families. And the most extraordinary thing was that these women had never seen India. They were 3rd generation diaspora. They had never seen India. But they were willing to fight and die for India that they had never seen. And they came in large numbers to be recruited. Many of them had to be sent back. It's all very interesting stories. But anyway, finally, 1,200 women from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, and there's always one country. I think these were the countries. They were recruited and they were trained in exactly the same way as the men were trained, and so on and so forth. It's a very, very exciting and wonderful story.
There was one difference in the training. Netaji insisted that there were no galis.
Yes. Netaji said to the men who used to give the command, okay, you have to watch your language. He was very, very concerned always about the safety and security of these women. He said कि आप जब command दोगे तो आप गाली नहीं बकोगे, आपके मुंह से गाली नहीं निकलनी चाहिए. And the people who did the training, they said this was the most difficult part of the training. To avoid giving galis
काफी
for
मुश्किल
those
रहा होगा उनके लिए।
subadar majors and all of
काफी
that.
मुश्किल रहा होगा उनके लिए।
बहुत नहीं, they said वो सबसे ज़्यादा मुश्किल यही काम था. तो खैर, anyway, they were trained and they had to carry those heavy loads. But you see, the interesting thing is, and we keep forgetting this, we talk about empowerment. There's no such thing as empowerment. That's rubbish. It is giving an opportunity to women to, be able to do what they're capable of doing, which they're not given most of the time. And all these women from these poor families, they were all there wearing trousers, they all cut their hair, and they were all carrying these rifles, and that just really changed them. And it's very tragic that after the war was over, most of them had to go back to the lives that they came from. But this is the story of the Rani of Jhansi regiment. 1,200 women, diaspora, never seen India, and they fought, and they were part of the most horrible retreat from, well, almost Manipur, Burma, and back to Singapore, where they were faced with hunger, starvation, all kinds of diseases. But they went through it, they did it, and they came back to Singapore. So that's a part of our history that I think much more should be known about. There are a lot of women now who are interested in, feminist history, women's history. And I think that, I hope that they will give attention to this very, very incredible chapter in our history, because this was the first fighting women's regiment ever in the world. I don't know about the Amazons and all that earlier, because we don't have enough material about that. But in the known and written history, this was the first women's fighting regiment. And I'm very proud that my mother was the head of it. And I have grown up on the stories of their heroism and bravery.
And the troops, they looked up to the commander. I mean, not only as a commander, but also as a guardian, a mentor. And she was fondly called Dr. Lakshmi Bai.
It was interesting because it was Rani of Jhansi regiment.
Yes.
And Rani of Jhansi was Lakshmi Bai, and my mother was also Lakshmi, so there was a kind of a
Yes.
interesting correspondence. But she was not Lakshmi Bai, she was always called Captain Lakshmi.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Devika, your grandfather, K.D. Pande, he was a part of the war.
Yes.
He came back, married the love of his life, and spent a fulfilled life thereafter. Why don't you tell us something about that? What you must have heard from family, friends, his peers from that time.
So Captain K.D. Pande was my grandfather, and and he was a part of the Bombay Sappers regiment, and he was also a part of the Second World War, and he was in Singapore when Singapore surrendered. So a lot of the stories that are in Gautamji's book are, even though his name is not in the book, but a lot of the stories that he has written in this book are the stories of my grandfather and what he would have gone through as well when he was, the prisoner of war of the Japanese. So when we were growing up here in Nainital, my sister and I, we were told a lot of stories about our grandfather, about how what a strong iron will he had, and his moral sense, and strong moral sense, and right and wrong, and all sorts of stories about how a military gong would be rung in the hotel to call people for lunch and dinner. And also he even had plans, very grand plans of post-military Bollywood career. So we had all these stories, but there was a part of his story that we never knew about, and that was what happened during those 5 years when he was in Singapore, or we didn't even know he was in Singapore. We had been told that he was in Burma, and we never knew what had happened. Even when he came back, he never spoke about it. No one ever asked him about it because they were just so happy that he had come back. So it was just a blank space, which I know that a lot of families in India have those spaces in their histories because their parents or their grandparents had these lived experiences but never spoke about it. And so it was a moment of serendipity, I would say, when my mother chanced upon an article that had been written by Gautamji in the Scroll magazine about this very book, about the forgotten Indian prisoners of war. And I felt that I had this opportunity to, maybe find out something about that missing piece of his life. And so in my email, I wrote to him that my grandfather passed away before I was born, and it has always been a great curiosity for us of the younger generation to know more of his story. And maybe somehow we can fit the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together so that we may see him for the man that he was and not the fragments that we have been left with. And I was so happy when Gautamji was able to get back to me. He was very kind to reach out to me. And he sent me the discharge summary of Captain K.D. Pande. This was like a part of the interrogation report that was written by the British after he had returned, which I didn't know that it existed. And so on that was written, name Captain K.D. Pande, son of Badridat Pande, resident of Grand Hotel, Mall Road, Nainital. And I cannot describe the feeling that was, because that was what we had been waiting for. That was that moment. And let me tell you, it's one thing to read about world wars and about far-off places with unfamiliar names, that this happened or that happened. It's a completely different feeling when you're reading your grandfather's name as a part of a company that is coming down the Malayan Peninsula, blowing up bridges to try and stop the Japanese from advancing, reading about the surrender of Singapore, and knowing that he was there, and then reading about these hell ships that took these Indian prisoners of war across from Singapore to islands scattered across the oceans, and so many people died, and then about what happened to them on those islands, and then finally they were liberated by the Australian Allied Forces. It's quite an incredible thing to read about, and I often thought to myself, like, what allows a person to survive the horrors of a war like this? How does one come out on the other end and live the kind of life that K.D. Pande then lived here in Nainital? Like, he had a full life. So how does that happen? And my answer to that would be that it's love. Because for K.D. Pande, the love of his life was Rama Joshi. And they were engaged to be married before this war came and took him away. And I think it was their great love that held K.D. Pande together for those 2.5 years in a Japanese concentration camp. And I think it was their great love that held Rama Joshi together, because she refused to get married to anyone else, and she said, no, he's going to come back. And she didn't even know that he was alive at that point. And she was a young girl. She was about 16 or 17 when he had left. So for me, like, great love wins over great wars. And I think that because we're talking about the forgotten soldiers, I think that just sitting over here today, 75 years later, we're sitting here and we're having this conversation, and it just goes to show that that they may have been forgotten. These soldiers may have been forgotten by the history books, and they may have been forgotten by the people, by the country that they fought for. But they were certainly not forgotten by the families that waited for them and prayed for them. And I think that he would be very happy that we are having this conversation, and I'm sure he's really very proud. Yeah, so thank you.
Wonderful. Devika, you mentioned about hell ships. Gautam, what were these hell ships? And you mentioned in the book also.
I just wanted to tell you something.
Yeah.
Many people ask me, how many books have you sold? And of course, I'd love people to buy my book, and I believe it's doing well. But I don't count how many books I've sold. What I count is how many families I've been able to tell this story to. There are many people I've met, like I met Subhashini before I finished writing the book, before I wrote the book, but she knew a lot about what had happened to her mother and her father. But there have been 5 families, Devika's and 4 more, who knew nothing about what had happened to their father, grandfather, and uncle. It was painful, happy, sad, whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but it's really gratifying to be able to tell the family about what they experienced, what their father or grandfather experienced, because they didn't know. Some of the stories I've had to tell are very sad at the end of it. There was one lady, she was a grandmother, 85-year-old grandmother. She was at my event in Bangalore and she could speak only Tamil. And she was crying. She was talking about her father was a prisoner along with Dr. Lakshmi Swaminathan, with Colonel Sehgal and Captain Pande. But he died in Singapore in 1942. This 85-year-old woman was 1 year old when he left, so she never knew him. What was she crying about? She was crying about the experience of her mother looking after 4 young children and never seeing her husband again, and how difficult her life was. And while talking, she started crying. I started crying. The audience started crying. Then after the function, I went to her and said, "Auntie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that this would happen to you." She said, "Gautam, I'm so glad that you have given me this chance, because it's a catharsis for me. I needed to get it out of my system. It's been inside me for 80 years. And even my children don't know. They need to know how great their grandmother was." And so it's been basically, I think, the order of my life to be able to tell these families how brave their father or grandfather was. And you don't need to be a Paramveer Chakra, only a Paramveer Chakra. Of course, those are very great people. But every soldier has a very difficult life. And really they are very brave in what they do. And also, like your grandmother Rama, the women waiting for the husband. The story of a soldier, the story of a soldier, only half of it is what happened to him. The other half, and at times even more than the other half, is what happened to his wife, who had to wait alone for him, or for his fiancée, your grandmother, who also waited alone for him. And really, it's a great, it's a very important thing for us to remember, not just the soldier, but also his waiting wife, as I refer to her. And yes, so that's been the greatest thing. And I haven't answered your question about the hell ships, but let me tell you a little bit about it, because basically, what were these soldiers doing in Singapore? As Subhashini described, they were the British used the Indian soldiers to defend their empire all over the world. Japan was expected to invade Malaysia, and the Indian army was sent to defend it. What most of us don't know, I didn't know certainly, that half the army defending Singapore were Indian. Even the Singaporeans don't know. And of course, because of the empire was stretched, the battle was a continuous series of retreats, well planned and organized by Captain Keshav Dutt Pandey. I remember the first email you sent. In her email, she said, "My grandfather is Captain Pandey and he was in Burma, and I heard about you researching these soldiers in Singapore. By any chance, can you help me?" So I replied to her saying, "By any chance, is your grandfather Captain Keshav Dutt Pandey?" And she replied saying, "Yes." I said, "Oh, I know everything about him, because he's all over the archives." Because what had happened was that after the INA got disbanded temporarily, the Japanese sent 17,000 troops to what is today Papua New Guinea. And they went in these hell ships that you were talking about. And those ships were, if you have seen movies of the Nazis sending Jews and other civilians to concentration camps, stuffed in the cattle truck with no place to stand or sit, shitting and eating right there, and dying in the cold or the heat. This is how your grandfather was sent on those ships, but those journeys lasted 60 days. There was no place to sit or lie down. You had to crouch because they had divided up the holes into 3 feet high places. 3,000 soldiers died on the way reaching because they were sunk by American submarines. And of the remaining 10,000 that reached, 14,000 that reached, 7,000 of them died. And fortunately, your grandfather survived. Why Keshav Dutt Pandey is very prominent in the archives is because those 17,000 troops were sent in groups, there were 27, 28 groups of 500 to 600 men each. And each group was commanded by an Indian officer. And one of the groups was commanded by Captain Keshav Dutt Pandey. That's why he's all over the archives, because all those men were interrogated when they got back, or the 25% who survived. And all of them talk about what Keshav Dutt Pandey had done. It was a very, very, very difficult job, because not only did you have to survive yourself what the Japanese were doing to you, but also be the shield between the Japanese and your men. Keshav Dutt Pandey looked after his men as if they were his children. And he did that in very difficult circumstances. And there was one particular case, there was one officer who was junior to him, who had been beaten up so badly by the Japanese that after the war, based on evidence gathered by Keshav Dutt Pandey and other men, those 2 Japanese men were taken to trial, and they were given 15 years of jail each. 15 years of jail for beating up someone. You can imagine how badly they were beaten up. And this is all done based on all the evidence that have been kept and gathered by Keshav Dutt Pandey. And please forgive me for calling him that instead of Dadaji or something, because I've been living with Keshav Dutt Pandey in my head, and that's what he is for me. So this is the man.
Was his name? So
Yeah, this is the man from Nainital who looked after his men so bravely, and it's a great tribute to your family.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. But there is detailed account in your book about the soldiers. Now, not only the officers, it's the officers, the JCOs, the NCOs. I mean, you've given a lot of detail whenever you've spoken about any one of them. I mean, rather all of them. So, if you were to talk about any one of those individuals from the book, who would that be?
So, so like in, when we read history, they're written by Churchill or General this or, a Professor that. All of them, of course, great books. But what I found and was moved most by was by the words of the junior men in this army of 62,000 who were with Keshav Dutt Pandey and Colonel Sehgal. And these are the Jawans, these are the Havildars, what they thought they experienced. And I think if you were to ask me about one man, I would talk about Captain Mohan Singh. So this is the book, and there are 4 heroes in the cover. This is Captain Mohan Singh, who was the Sikh gentleman. I'd never heard of him about 2 years ago. And what I discovered was that he was 32 years old. He had from a very humble background. His father died before he was born. His mother died when he was 6 and he was brought up by his mama. He joined the army as a Sipahi, a private, and at the age of 18, and he was recognized by his British officers as someone with great potential. And so he was sent to the first batch of Indian officers to be trained at the military academy in Dehradun, which was the first batch in 1932, which had some very prominent people like Field Marshal Manekshaw and President Ayub Khan, who was in fact in Mohan Singh's battalion. So Mohan Singh was one of the men with Keshav Dutt Pandey and Colonel Sehgal, who was sent to defend Malaysia. And he was chosen by the Japanese in December 1941, a few days after the war began, to start the Indian National Army. And the Indian National Army was, as Subhashini mentioned, It was formed with the help of the Japanese to fight, to attack India and throughout the British. And this young man, he's 32, and he was totally unknown outside of his battalion, and he was able to recruit and form this first Indian National Army. And without him, the great legacy of Netaji, who came in July 1943 after the submarine journey that Subhashini explained, he was a great contributor to that legacy of Netaji and what the INA meant for India and the people of India after that. So this is the one man, who I think really was someone who I came to admire, and that's why he's the first hero on the cover of the book.
We've got about a minute left. Sure. So very quickly, if you could just give us a backdrop about on 21st December 1942, Captain Mohan Singh, he wrote a letter and signed off with, India first and India last. Long live India.
So basically, Mohan Singh, started the Indian National Army, but he quickly got disillusioned by the Japanese. He didn't trust them for the promises that they had made, and he refused to cooperate with them. And then they arrested him and they sent him to exile. And he had made this order out, which said that he anticipated that he would be arrested or worse, assassinated. And he said if that was to happen, the INA was to be disbanded. And that is how he ended the order of that order, which was India first, India last, long live India.
Yes, wonderful. We'll now open up for questions from the audience. Anybody has any questions?
I don't actually have a question, but I have to say what an amazingly emotional session, and my heart goes out to everybody there who spoke about their family. And I wish that we all knew how to value these experiences much better, and there was a way to educate the current generation about what all our ancestors went through, really. And even the INA, we've got independence, but have we really done much more after that? These are all questions which I wish that we could all be more reflective and sort of knowledgeable about. And I wish we could take action to make all these sacrifices worth it. Thank you so much. Really, really nice. Very lovely.
To what you're saying, I think if we all go back home and just ask about our own grandfather or nana, dada, dadi, and try to make a scrapbook of what they did. They need not have been Nobel Prize winners, but they would be great people who, especially for your own family. So I think if we have curiosity about starting with our own family, that would be great. And okay, so there you are. You have your story already.
I just want to say hats off to you that you have come out with this book, because very less people talk about the prisoners of war, and very less people I've noticed have been talking about partition of India also. What happened during partition of India, very less people know. They only have seen certain scenes in movies or a movie which was made in Hollywood by the name of Partition. What happened to the families which were brought here today, especially the asylums which were in India and Pakistan? Those patients who were there in those asylums were transferred to Indian asylums, and these patients were transferred to that asylum. What was the fate of those patients, and what actually happened? Some of them were really not mad. They were not psychics. And the doctors asked them that you are free to go. They didn't want to go. I mean, certain things in partition and war happened in such ways we can't even imagine. Hats off to you, sir. Hats off to you that you have brought out these stories. And it is an excellent, excellent step taken by you. Hats off to you once again.
Thank you to all our speakers for sharing these stories with us. May I now request Geeta Kaur and Arshi Ahmed for the felicitation of our speakers.